Side, the other side of the news. I'm Daisy Liasakidi, your host, and today we're going to be addressing food insecurity and scarcity. We're going to be asking questions like, is it the same thing as hunger? Is it the same thing as famine? How can we get out of it? Is Nigeria at risk of becoming a nation where food is scarce? Well, according to the United Nations, food insecurity and malnutrition is going to hit a 10-year-old high this year because several people are finding it difficult to get food. And now they said for the first time in a long while, the Sahel regions are gradually becoming one of the most affected nations in the world. So countries like Burkina Faso and Mali are experiencing a lot of food shortage. Basically, maybe because of unrest in those areas and the post-COVID-19 pandemic issues and so many other problems. And of course, climate change. The weather is not very predictable these days, but a lot of problems in the world, and it regards food. You cannot take food and water from the survival of living things. It's very key and it's very important. And because of this very devastating situation, we said on Flipside today, let's talk about this. Let's address food insecurity. Let's talk about food scarcity. We're not talking about inflation, like food is expensive. Food is really expensive in Nigeria, but that's not what we're focusing on. Make we fair when they see the food shop. All right, I have two guests in the studio with me. There are agro consultants, they're farmers. One is into livestock and the other is a beekeeper that we've met before on the show. So I have Samson, a decade woman, with me in the studio today. Good morning. Good afternoon, rather.
Good afternoon, Lizzie.
I've been here since morning. All right, so Samson, the last time he was here, I told him that when he's coming here today, he should bring honey for me. Where's my honey?
Don't worry, we'll get it.
Okay, I also have another brother here. His name is Joseph Osawao, and he's an agro consultant. He's into livestock farming, though. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's good to have you both here. So I think I'm just going to start right up with Samson first. We keep having these words, food insecurity, food scarcity, hunger, malnutrition. These are words that when you're searching for information about topics like this, you get them often. So are they the same? Food insecurity, food scarcity, and hunger, are they same?
They are they are close words and they are mostly used together sometimes. But food insecurity is an umbrella covering most of these words. Like food insecurity, like food security, before we look at food insecurity, is actually the measure of individual physical, social, and economic access to nutritious food. So, when we are talking of hunger, hunger is actually the distress that comes when one is food insecure. And when you are also talking of the other
scarcity.
Scarcity is actually one of the elements of food insecurity. Yes.
Okay, so the food insecurity is the umbrella. The others are under it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, now let's talk about farmers. Today we're focusing on food insecurity. We're looking at a farmer's perspective, basically. And so we're just going to hit the ground running. And Joseph, what contributions or what do you think farming practices can contribute? What farming practices do you think can contribute to food security?
Okay, that's a very good question. You see, like he was trying to explain, when we're talking about food security, we are looking at making food available physically, economically, in all places, at all times, to everybody. So whether you are rich or you are poor, you have access to food. So that's basically it. Now, as of today, about 80% of the food we consume is still produced by smallholder farmers with their crude method, you know, as we used to do, as our forefathers did it.
Yeah.
So now when looking at that, we are not talking about good agricultural practices. In developing world or developed world, we see that they are bringing technology into agriculture for sustainability. Because like you said initially, we are looking at global warming today. These are factors that have changed the times and seasons of food production. Normally by this time, people are already pulling out of production. They are good because dry season is setting in. But as of today, as we speak, people are doing land preparation in June. Why? because of climate change.
So
one of the things that farmers need to start looking at is climate, looking at climate smart agriculture, which we cover under good agricultural practices. Then look at the methods, the practices that we carry out. Otherwise, if we don't get those things right, we won't be even be talking about food security, because it's a factor that we may never ever be able to achieve if these practices are not considered or put in place by farmers.
All right, you just talked about the weather. There are some things that normally come with rainy season in Edo State that we're waiting for the rains. You have vegetables, it's in abundance and it's cheap. I went to buy efo. Some people call it shoko, and some call it green. My dear, I bought 1,000 naira worth of green, and I was looking at it like, what did this? Things are not, the weather is really not helping. Things are changing so much. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges, Samson, you would say farmers in this part of the nation or in parts of Nigeria are facing?
Thank you, Daisy, for that question. Like you just analyzed that you bought green for what you used to buy at a lesser amount you bought. One of the factors is actually economic factor, besides the other factors that would look at climate and the rest. So some of the inputs that are used in producing these crops, they are not as cheap as they used to be. So you won't expect a farmer who buys what he used to produce. His production cost used to be probably 1,000 naira to produce something worth 5,000 naira. And now he's using 4,000 naira to produce the same quantity. So these things have really affected food security as a whole. So these are some of the ways we can actually see how government policy can come into play. So farmers face this problem of, yes, the soil does not really produce as it used to be. They don't get enough. Yes, there is a climate change and things are changing. We need, the farmer needs to adapt to smart agricultural practices. But the economic angle of it is really hitting hard on the farmers. And also there is also the aspect of security aspect of it, that's the stress of the environment. So like we all know the herders farmer clash. So those things, those factors, when we compound them together, they really influence and affected food security as a topic.
The United Nations was actually focusing more on Burkina Faso and Mali this year. They've been talking about Burkina Faso and Mali, and this region actually facing some sort of unrest. Now, but I was so amazed that they said 45,000 people are at risk of acute malnutrition. And the 42,000 of the 45,000 are spread between Mali and Burkina Faso. I'm like, why did Nigeria not come into this list? We are actually believed to be the poorest nation in the world as of today. So, wow, we're not there. And we have big issues of unrest and all of that. But anyway, what ways can what would you suggest farmers to, or we should do to ensure we get more food? Because we don't really have food. Our farmers in Nigeria, I don't think they're producing enough. In Edo State, let me use this as an example. There's the late Captain Osa has this greenhouse for tomato, and that tomato has done a lot for many people here. The production from just that one house could cover almost half the state's needs at the time. And they had these different species of pepper that we loved so much, maybe because you just have like 3 seeds and it's so hot and we like it. So, well, that's on the one hand. What ways can we get more farmers into stuffs like this so we get more food? Because there's no food.
Okay. That's a very good analysis. I like that you have to bring Captain side to the equation. Now, that's the difference between smallholder farmers and commercial farmers. So if we have, what you just said now, just basically tells us that if we have 3 of Captain Osa in Edo State, then we can start thinking of food security, right? Just 3 people. But if you look at the capital outlay in such a venture, the majority of farmers cannot afford it. As a matter of fact, majority of the farmers, they are just smallholder farmers, and they cannot produce much. They don't have, economically, they don't have good capital, to do production in that scale. So the best recommendation for us is still learning, which is, okay, when we come to the issue of organizations and government support. Organizations these days, they don't give farmers money anymore. Why? Because you give someone money, it goes to buy a car.
Of course.
And start doing other business, right? So they are investing in technical support, which is the good agricultural practices. So once the farmers have those skills, you cannot talk of scaling up or increasing what they are already producing. Because the issue is this, though we are not producing enough, but what we are producing is actually enough to sustain us. But we have what we call post-harvest loss. About 50, in fact, let me just break it down. 30 to 70% of what we produce actually goes into waste. Like what you were saying about vegetable now. It will shock you that the volume of vegetable we actually produce in these states is such that you can actually buy that shoko or the green lesser, maybe at 100 naira for what you are paying 200 naira for right now, if not for the huge post-harvest loss. And you know that if I produce, let's say I spend 500,000 to produce vegetable, or let's say of 50 tons, no, let's say 1 ton, let's use 1 ton from 1 acre, for instance, then I now lose about 30% of that. That 30% loss, I'm going to put the cost on top of the 70% I'm going to sell to you. So that automatically brings us back to food inflation that we're talking about. So all these things, they are all intertwined. So, but if we really want to take this thing seriously as, government or agencies to support farmers, we need to train them, let them know best practices to give them higher yields of whatever they are already producing.
Interesting. Okay, I was even about to ask ways they could get maybe loans and grants and all of that, but you've already burst my bubble by saying people hardly give farmers loans and grants. But we hear governments every now and again, announce that they're giving farmers money, they're giving farmers fertilizers, they're giving farmers machines. So are you saying you've not benefited from any of these so far?
Okay, fine. This is...
okay, the both of you will answer, because you both do your different farming. It's not the same. Okay. Let's just continue with Joseph.
This, I'm going to be very, very careful with this answer, because I'm into the 3 sides of the divide. Work with the government, work with the international organizations, and I'm also a farmer working directly with the farmers, so I'm going to be very careful. Now, last month, we had a training. We do training around the geopolitical zones in Edo State. Okay. And so we've done in Edo South, we went to Edo North while we were training, during the training. So some farmers asked the question. So, we applied for fertilizer, we applied for cassava stems and seeds, and right now we went to so-and-so place, and they told us that our names are no longer there. Now, we heard yesterday that they started disbursing. Now we have escalated the issue. Then the next day, we came for training, and they asked another question. They said, right now, they've called some of them. Let's say 100 people applied. They've called like 20 people to come and collect input. Now, the question is what happened between that day and the next day.
Yeah.
Now, the other question will be, did the government actually release this fertilizer or this support? My answer from one side of the divide is yes. But is it getting to the farmers? The answer is no. So what is happening? In between, something is happening, right? So I'm not going to go into that. Okay. But the truth is that the government actually has the interest of the people, of the real farmers at heart, and they actually plan to support them with those inputs. But it's not getting directly to the majority of the farmers. Okay. So that's where the problem is. Yeah.
Okay, so we are the ones hurting ourselves. Samson, have you benefited?
I wouldn't say no. But the issue has always been sometimes where you really need the benefit the most. Okay. Imagine you are a farmer and the road to your farm is bad, very, very bad. And probably the means of getting to your farm is not there. And now you are looking for a support, and you just hear one day they said they are giving a kind of support to farmers, and what are they sharing them? Probably Indomie and the rest. You get it? So these are some of the things that we must really look at. I don't really know. It won't take much if the government, maybe in each geopolitical zone or political ward, they just map out the major roads that leads to the farms and grade them for the farmers.
And we'll be fine.
And that
half of our problems
exactly,
will be solved.
half of the problem of post-harvest losses will be reduced by that problem. But most times you see the problem, the help will come in another form that it won't really be significant to production.
Interesting.
So that has been it.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just add to what I said. You see, sometimes another issue there is the quantity of the support that is actually given. Let's say I'm a farmer, I produce 1 acre of maize, and I'm giving 1 tin cup of maize seed,
To plant.
and maybe a half bag of fertilizer, right? So what can that do for me as a farmer, an existing farmer that has 1 acre of land to cultivate? So you are, when we are talking about food security, you are indirectly telling me that you are not supporting me,
Yeah.
because what I want at 1 acre level, you should be supporting me with something that can take me to at least 2 acres, right, or 2 acres, so that I can produce more food for the people to eat. So that's another issue.
All right, we're going to go on a break quickly, and it's not a break for relaxation, it's a learning break. The United Nations has done some documentaries on famine and food security, and this documentary is for everyone, especially farmers, but for everyone. So after that, we'll talk some more.
About 10,000 years ago, humans began to farm. This agricultural revolution was a turning point in our history that enabled people to settle, build, and create. In short, agriculture enabled the existence of civilization. Today, approximately 40% of our planet is farmland. Spread all over the world, these agricultural lands are the pieces to a global puzzle we are all facing. In the future, how can we feed every member of a growing population a healthy diet? Meeting this goal will require nothing short of a second agricultural revolution. The first agricultural revolution was characterized by expansion and exploitation, feeding people at the expense of forests, wildlife, and water, and destabilizing the climate in the process. That's not an option the next time around. Agriculture depends on a stable climate, with predictable seasons and weather patterns. This means we can't keep expanding our agricultural lands, because doing so will undermine the environmental conditions that make agriculture possible in the first place. Instead, the next agricultural revolution will have to increase the output of our existing farmland for the long term, while protecting biodiversity, conserving water, and reducing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So what will the future farms look like? This drone is part of a fleet that monitors the crops below. The farm may look haphazard, but it's a delicately engineered use of the land that intertwines crops and livestock with wild habitats. Conventional farming methods cleared large swathes of land and planted them with a single crop, eradicating wildlife and emitting huge amounts of greenhouse gases in the process. This approach aims to correct that damage. Meanwhile, moving among the crops, teams of field robots apply fertilizer in targeted doses. Inside the soil, hundreds of sensors gather data on nutrients and water levels. This information reduces unnecessary water use and tells farmers where they should apply more and less fertilizer, instead of causing pollution by showering it across the whole farm. But the farms of the future won't be all sensors and robots. These technologies are designed to help us produce food in a way that works with the environment rather than against it, taking into account the nuances of local ecosystems. Lower-cost agricultural practices can also serve those same goals and are much more accessible to many farmers. In fact, many such practices are already in use today and stand to have an increasingly large impact as more farmers adopt them. In Costa Rica, farmers have intertwined farmland with tropical habitat so successfully that they've significantly contributed to doubling the country's forest cover. This provides food and habitat for wildlife, as well as natural pollination and pest control from the birds and insects these farms attract, producing food while restoring the planet. In the United States, ranchers are raising cattle on grasslands composed of native species, generating a valuable protein source using production methods that store carbon and protect biodiversity. In Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Nepal, new approaches to rice production may dramatically decrease greenhouse gas emissions in the future. Rice is a staple food for 3 billion people and the main source of livelihood for millions of households. More than 90% of rice is grown in flooded paddies, which use a lot of water and release 11% of annual methane emissions, which accounts for 1 to 2% of total annual greenhouse gas emissions globally. By experimenting with new strains of rice, irrigating less, and adopting less labor-intensive ways of planting seeds, farmers in these countries have already increased their incomes and crop yields while cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions. In Zambia, numerous organizations are investing in locally specific methods to improve crop production, reduce forest loss, and improve livelihoods for local farmers. These efforts are projected to increase crop yield by almost a quarter over the next few decades. If combined with methods to combat deforestation in the region, they could move the country toward a resilient, climate-focused agricultural sector. And in India, where up to 40% of post-harvest food is lost or wasted due to poor infrastructure, farmers have already started to implement solar-powered cold storage capsules that help thousands of rural farmers preserve their produce and become a viable part of the supply chain. It will take all of these methods, from the most high-tech to the lowest cost, to revolutionize farming. High-tech interventions stand to amplify climate and conservation-oriented approaches to farming, and large producers will need to invest in implementing these technologies. Meanwhile, we'll have to expand access to the lower-cost methods for smaller-scale farmers. This vision of future farming will also require a global shift toward more plant-based diets and huge reductions in food loss and waste, both of which will reduce pressure on the land and allow farmers to do more with what they have available. If we optimize food production, both on land and sea, we can feed humanity within the environmental limits of the Earth. But there's a very small margin of error, and it will take unprecedented global cooperation and coordination of the agricultural lands we have today. An agricultural revolution can start with you.
All right, so the biology of farming, and the part of the video that really struck me was when we were talking about technology, on how technologies that you could use to better your produce and even sell your produce. So you don't need to even be so bothered about bringing your things out of the farm. The buyers can come to you to reduce cost, but are we really ready? Are we open enough? Are we developed enough for all of those things that were being said there? All right, I have Joseph Osawa in the studio, and I also have Samson Ewoma with me in the studio, and they're both agro-consultants, and they're into livestock farming and general farming, I think. All right, so we're just talking about food insecurity and scarcity, ways to address them. So in the video we just watched, they were talking about tech in farming. I don't know, are we ready for that conversation in Nigeria, in agriculture today? And what kind of technology would you be telling farmers to focus on? Because we have to take this farming beyond the villages. We need to get people who are learned, educated into it. And what technology should government be trying to invest in to better secure our food production? Okay.
Thank you very much. You know, when we are talking of technology, sometimes we look at it like a big topic. Sometimes it could just be an improved agricultural practices. Many times, those countries that we look up to that are self-sufficient in food production, it's not really probably the technology, but or the space they cultivate. You move around those states, you see so many farms everywhere, but the food output from those farms are not sufficient. So productivity is one of the things that when we are talking, we look at your planting spacing, the type of crop you are planting, the material you are planting. You know, sometimes some farmers now, they just harvest maize from probably the first plant, they harvest and replant that same maize again, and they harvest from that maize and replant another. So when you are doing that as a farmer, you discover that you actually violating some rules, because that seed you are planting and replanting have lost some of its potential over time, genetically, yes. So many a time, improved seeds, you are supposed to plant improved seed at the end of a farming season, not the one you harvest again and replant. So you discover that productivity is one of our problems, not necessarily many people going into production. And the second part of it is you see that our method of production here, where you have to brush and wait for some time to dry and the rest, is really not the global practice. So the world have even gone past the use of tractor, but here you hardly see tractor. So an hectare of land that a tractor will cultivate in a day, 10 persons may not be able to cultivate it in a week. So you discover with all this disparity, there is the need for us to embrace technology at different levels, both in the seed pre-planting, which means the seed material you are planting, the planting operation, and the harvesting. So my friend just mentioned that most of the problem has always been that most of the crop that you harvest are going to post-harvest losses. So you discover that when you have good harvesting machines in place, these things will be already dealt with.
Okay. All right. For those who want to go into farming, I'm glad that you're both educated. This guy was my classmate, actually. For those who want to go into farming and educated or not, what advice would you give to them? Because the goal is not just to farm to make money only. It's to farm to ensure that there's food, and not just food, good food and affordable food. So what advice would you be giving those intending to join your trade?
Okay. The first thing I always tell people is knowledge. You must seek the knowledge, the right knowledge for whatever industry you want to go into. So if it's farming, first of all, you ask yourself, what time do I have available to me for whatever venture I want to go into? So then you talk about the capital. What income do I have, or what source of income can sustain whatever I want to do? Then you're not talking about the knowledge you have. Now, all these things, they influence your decision or what to produce, for whom to produce. So there can be two farmers. One is producing broiler, the other one is also producing broiler. But this one, farmer A is producing for supermarkets, while farmer B is producing for the local market, or ring road or bar market, as it were. Both of them are doing the same production, but different for different reasons. So the one that is producing for supermarket is thinking of processing, right? But the one that is producing for local market is thinking of just, doing something small, whatever, and selling to them. So two different goals, but the same production. So this is why it is very important for you to seek the right knowledge or the right guidance, let me put it that way. So as a consultant, we'll ask you the right questions. What are you willing to invest? What are you willing to do? What's your goal for this venture? Like you said, it's not just to make money, it's sustainability. Most of the things that key farming or agriculture generally, agribusiness generally in Nigeria is poor management or poor management practices. Okay, as of today, almost every week, I get calls from farmers that they are willing to lease or rent out their farmland or whatever they are using, that they are no longer interested. And you ask yourself, these people, they have money. Some are even abroad. You ask yourself, oh, why? Why are you doing this? You say, I'm not making money from this thing. Yeah. And you ask, why are you not making money? Because of poor management. So while you went into it, the goal was, let me just start this business, right? Let me start making money. You didn't get the right guidance. So my first advice for anybody that wants to go into agriculture is guidance and the technical knowledge that you need to support whatever you are doing.
Okay, now, Samson, how do we get more young people into farming? If you still go to the villages, yes, there are young people still who are farming. Maybe they are joining their parents to farm. But in the large scale, you don't find many young people farming. They'll tell you they want to do Yahoo though.
Yeah, just in addition to what he has mentioned, you discover one of the problems, mostly in this part of the world, is the land holding system. So if you want to, I think there was a time the government was trying to see how we can open up, maybe talk to some community and let's have large land so that people can come and farm, we open it for them. And you discover that this one will tell me my father have 1 acre in this farm, the other one will tell me my father has half acre. The other one will tell you my father has 1/4 acre in the same land. So the land holding system has not really encouraged people to go into large commercial farming as such. But outside that, one of the problems I also see that when addressed can really encourage young people to come into agriculture is the problem, in advanced climate. Those who are going to farmer does not have business like trying to get money from his own pocket to do farm. There are people who we call marketers. So many a time they ought to be the ones sponsoring farming while they get the produce and sell. But in a situation where a farmer will go 360 degrees to do farming, you discover that there is no efficiency. At every level of agriculture, there ought to be people, hence, who are doing different things at different times. So you discover that in the long run, there is efficiency in the system and there is more output. Unlike when just one person, only you are doing the farming, you only have you and your wife, you are doing the farming, you are processing, you take to the market, you alone, and the government is even encouraging you to also export, just you alone. So it's really difficult. So these are ways that when these things are solved, you discover that farming will become interested and encouraging for young people.
Okay, when government talk about exporting our farm produce, I thought that word is going to really drive the young ones into it. Like, we like to take things abroad and we love to bring things from abroad. Or it seems not to be working so much. We still have the older ones benefiting more from exporting than the younger ones. Okay, and on the final note, I'll ask this question, but you both will answer. Okay. All right, now, what steps can government take to support farmers in addressing food insecurity and promoting sustainable agriculture? You've mentioned quite a number, so it's more like a paraphrasing before we go.
Okay, one of the ways the government can really start, many a time when governments are making policy, they tend to look at the immediate benefits. What can they say, okay, my administration have generated this revenue. But sometimes government policy should not just be for revenue alone. We look at the long-term effect on farmers, on production, like that. So one of the ways is like access to their farm. We look at food security as, access to farm is one of the problems that farmers face. The roads they use in going to their farm, you discover that many times, mostly this period is bad, it's in bad shape. A farmer trekking 1 hour to go to his farm is uncalled for. If the farmer can support this farmer with means of getting to their farm like bike, as cheap as bike, yes, those are some of the, and also to attract investors into agriculture, like organizing the farmers into cooperative and getting people to talk to them and making arrangement on how they can move their produce and the rest with the farmers' consent on how the profit will be shared and everything. So I think that will really go a long way. And another way is in seed production. I just said that the practice of using seed after your agricultural season, you use the seed to replant again. There ought to be a seed bank in every agricultural communities, where they can easily access seeds and replant the seeds so that their yield can be increased.
Okay.
All right. Mine, the first thing is let's take agriculture seriously. So I'm saying this to both the federal and the state government. How can you have a budget allocation for agriculture about 1.1% of the budget? And that amounts to about 228 billion naira that is allocated to agriculture. Then out of that 228, 37.6 or thereabout percent is recurrent expenditure, which means the MDs, they take salaries, allowance, everything that goes there. So what we're actually expecting to go into capital expenditure is just like 59.8% or thereabout of that money into agriculture of a full country. And then we are talking about food security. It means we are joking actually. So now the other thing is let government encourage, like he has said, cluster farming. That is already ongoing with Owina River Basin. Then I don't know how effective it is. That's another thing. Then let government, because when we're talking about seasonality, it's basically water, because the sunlight doesn't change really. Rainy season or dry season, you have sunlight.
Yeah.
But the quantity of water that is available to you in rainy season and dry season is different. So let government invest in irrigation for farmers. So that can only work when you have cluster farming. So you fund that. Maybe they will pay later, or they pay instrumentally when they harvest, which is very workable plan. Then the last thing is power, which is infrastructure. You talked about road, but we are looking at power. How many farmers can actually fund generator or can actually own generators in their farm? Most of them cannot. So like in our farm or one of our farms, the entire fish sector is solar powered, from the bowl to everything. As a matter of fact, the entire farm, we don't even have power, NEPA lights in the whole farm. So we only just have generators as backup. It's solar powered. So what is that doing for us? That reduces our cost of production drastically. And then when we're talking about climate smart agriculture, so we are not increasing the carbon dioxide level that is in the atmosphere. So we are using like one stone to kill several birds. So, but how many farmers can actually, or smallholder farmers can actually fund such a project? Most of them cannot. So let government support in these two areas. Then, of course, from my experience with NGOs, they are funding technical support like trainings. They are also funding inputs, which government currently is doing. So I'm not going to mention that. But if we want to take that further, let's put in more efforts in providing credit facilities, inputs. Don't give farmers money. Don't just forget about it. Give them seeds, give them chemicals and stuff like that. And very importantly, give them access to insurance. Okay, this, when we used to say this, we've been saying this for over 10 years. Give farmers access to insurance, because what we have today, we're not going to go into that, but let government put their hands in insurance for farmers. Because look at last year, just 1 week of flooding, the whole country was in disarray when it comes to food.
Food production.
Yeah.
Food was not coming from north to south because there was no road, just one road. It's gone. Every other input that's supposed to come from the north was truncated, because you see, sometimes most of us, we think that it's only rice and beans and yam that comes from the north. No. One of the major, in fact, the biggest livestock feed manufacturing companies in Nigeria, or factories, are from the north. Kwara, Kaduna, Plateau State, and 2 other states like that. Just put them together. Last year, because of that flooding, what you experience here is that 1 kg of chicken that you probably bought 2.5 last week, because of that 1 week, is going to be 3,000 something.
It was.
Because the feed that we are using to feed the livestock here, majority of them is coming from the north, and we don't have access to them. So when supply is truncated or it drops and demand is still high, what will happen is price will go up, and that price is going to, there's a ripple effect on every other thing that you do. So a lot of things that we really need to put into consideration if we are serious about food security. Otherwise, we are just going to keep shifting in circles, like we are just postponing the evil day, like we are shifting it, let's just manage. No, we can't. This is not sustainable.
Interesting. Okay, thank you so much, Joseph and Samson. These are strong men from the Bible. They carry strong names. Okay, personally, I feel food insecurity, the discussion should actually start from the farmers, with the farmers, before we begin to even address food waste, beyond the waste from farms and in the markets to individual waste, before we begin to talk about any other thing. They are the ones who produce the food, and if they say we're not producing food anymore, what will happen? So we have to start the conversation with the farmers, and that's why we're focused on this today. There's just so much to be done when it comes to food insecurity, and with the little monies budgeted for the whole of agriculture in Nigeria, we still have pockets of corruption here and there on how things are dispersed. And investigations should start going into this agricultural sector. Yes, people should begin to be asked questions, interrogations should come. And let's see that the monies and the seeds and the right things are going to the right people, people who really need it. It shouldn't be because Daisy knows somebody who knows somebody that is in the ministry. Daisy, who is not a farmer, who is a journalist, begins to get seeds. Then I have to look for somewhere to sell just to make gains. These things are wrong. And so we'll start from there, and I'm sure we'll get it right eventually. All right, before we go, we're leaving you now, but we're leaving you with our last documentary on the show, and that's how we'll end Flipside today.
Even though enough food is grown to feed all 7 billion people on Earth, around 795 million, so 1 in 9 people, do not eat enough food to maintain good health. These people don't just live in less developed countries. Being undernourished is a problem all around the world. The ability to provide enough food for people is called food security. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economical access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food for an active and healthy life. There are many countries around the world for which food security is a major issue, and there are several reasons why this might be. Let's look at each of them in turn and how the problems could be solved. Firstly, the human population is increasing. In the last 100 years, it has quadrupled and shows no signs of slowing. More people means more food is needed, but also there is less room to farm and fewer resources like access to water. These challenges combined mean it is becoming more and more difficult to grow enough food for everyone. Ways to increase food population include the increase in the use of fertilizers and growing GM crops, which have a higher yield. To feed 9 billion people by 2050, most experts agree that we need to produce about 70% more food. And not only is the population increasing, but many people's diets are changing. Countries are becoming more developed, and their populations are eating more food, especially meat and fish. A good example is China, where a high population combined with a burgeoning economy has seen a rapid change in the types of food the population is consuming. This has a twofold impact on food security. First, it can result in the transport of food supplies away from other countries, possibly where the population may be poorer and in need of the food themselves. Secondly, the production of meat requires more space and resources than the growing of crops. Encouraging people in more developed countries to eat less meat and fish will help solve this problem. Some even say that we should be eating more insects, as these are a good source of protein, and farming them requires much fewer resources than larger animals. Would you eat insects to help increase food security? Climate change is also having an impact on food security, but some areas are experiencing higher levels of drought and others more flooding. Both reduce the ability of the land to provide food. Also, climate change has affected the distribution of pests and pathogens. Insects that once could not survive in an area because the climate was not suitable can now thrive there, and farmers are experiencing new pests and diseases that were not a problem in the past. New pesticides can be developed to help with this, as well as growing crops that are resistant to diseases. Finally, conflict can affect food security. An area affected by war will experience a reduction in farming. Infrastructure that supply water may become damaged, and the transport of food around the country is disrupted. International aid can help people in countries affected by conflict to avoid a food security crisis. So in this video, we have covered what food security is, some reasons why it is an issue, and the ways that they can be solved.